Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our first of two trainings in the Santa Clara County CoC Equal Access and Cultural Competency Training Series. My name is Monica Porter. I'm joined by my colleague Nicole Thomas today at Home Base, which is, as you may know, a nonprofit organization that provides technical assistance and training to the Office of Supportive Housing and Housing and Homeless Service Providers in Santa Clara County. In today's training, I'll start by providing a brief overview of the Equal Access Rule, and then I will turn it over to our friends from Life Moves, Home First, and the Q Corner, who are the main stars of today's show, and we'll be covering a 101 of concepts related to sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We are recording this training, and we will make the recordings available on the CoC website. We've also sent out the slides for the training, so you should have them in your email, and we'll be sending them out again later this week. I'm sure that you all are used to doing trainings on Zoom by now, but just in case, a couple of quick housekeeping measures. Hopefully you all are muted, and we ask that you please stay muted for now to cut down on background noise. If you have any questions during the training or are having any technical issues, please use the chat box and message me or Nicole directly, or send a message to everyone. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the training and pausing periodically to address any questions. As I noted earlier, we are recording the training, but the chat box will not be recorded. To find the chat box, if you're on a computer, use your screen to hover over, and a bar similar to the one on the slide should pop up at the bottom with a chat option somewhere in the middle. So we are all getting warmed up this morning still, so we'll start out nice and easy just to make sure that folks are able to find the chat box. If you could please send a greeting to everyone so that we know that you are here. Excellent. Thank you all, and happy Tuesday and good morning. And please do continue to feel free to say hello as we continue. So now let's get started with an overview of the Equal Access Rule, what it says, and how to apply it. So first, why are we here? We're here because Santa Clara County's community of providers has made a community-wide commitment to equal access to housing and services, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity and expression, including by setting a standard for equal access in the quality assurance standards. The purpose of this training is to honor and support that commitment. Like the skills required for case management, housing search, and understanding SSI applications, LGBTQ+ cultural competency is a skill and an approach that is necessary to doing the work of ending homelessness. Within the last few years, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD for short, has instituted several rules that are aimed at addressing the fact that LGBTQ+ populations did not have equal access to homeless services. The operative rule, and the one that we'll focus on this morning, is formally called Equal Access in Accordance with an Individual's Gender Identity in Community Planning and Development Programs Final Rule, known more familiarly as the Equal Access Rule. You may have heard of proposed changes to the Equal Access Rule recently, but the rule has not changed. So if anyone has heard about proposed changes to the ones that we'll discuss today, those have not happened. So the Equal Access Rule applies to all recipients and subrecipients of HUD's community planning and development grants, including those listed on the slide, such as CoC and ESG funding. For those of you who are not in this group, the Equal Access Rule provides a great baseline for serving the LGBTQ+ community. Some key points in the Equal Access Rule. First, it clarifies that gender identity is wholly self-identified, and separate from legal gender and/or identity documents. It prohibits intrusive questioning and requests for documentation, and it requires updates to policies and procedures. And again, the rule has not changed from this. So now to look at each of these key points in a bit more detail. First, the Equal Access Rule clarifies that gender identity is self-determined and provides the following definitions. Gender identity is defined as the gender with which a person identifies, regardless of the sex assigned to that person at birth, and regardless of the person's perceived gender identity. And perceived gender identity is defined as the gender with which a person is perceived to identify based on that person's appearance, behavior, expression, other gender-related characteristics, or sex assigned to the individual at birth or identified in documents. And I will clarify that these are the definitions that are provided in HUD's Equal Access Rule. The second key point from the Equal Access Rule is that intrusive questioning is prohibited. Providers must not ask intrusive questions regarding an individual's gender identity, including requests for documentary, physical, or medical evidence, anatomical information, or medical or physical history. At its core, it's about respecting and following what a person says their gender is without second guessing or asking for proof. This is also important because when we're thinking about lowering barriers, the less that people have to show or prove to receive help, the less likely they are to sleep on the street. This also aims to correct some institutional discrimination. Many of the clients that we work with may have a harder time getting identification that corresponds to their gender identity, or lack access to medical care and documentation. So finally, this is about respect and a client-centered approach. The third key point from the Equal Access Rule is regarding policies and procedures. Programs must have written policies and procedures that ensure equal access to programs for all individuals and their families, that provide housing, services, and accommodations in accordance with a client's gender identity, and that determine eligibility without regard to actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. Again, these practices and procedures need to be in writing, and they're important to have because it sets expectation for staff and clients. It provides institutional guidance so that everyone's on the same page, and it sets a tone and a message of inclusion. So before we get into applying the rule in different situations, I want to just pause here to see how we're doing. So if you could let me know in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being I'm totally lost and 5 being this makes sense, I got it. Can you let me know how we're doing so far? Great, thank you so much. And if there's any questions, feel free to let us know. So now let's take some of what we've learned and apply it in different contexts with some examples. So now that we've covered those key points, let's talk about applying the Equal Access Rule to the context that we face in our work. First, with shared sleeping or bathing areas. Placements must be made based on an individual's gender identity. Providers must take any non-discriminatory steps that are necessary and appropriate to address privacy concerns raised by residents. And facility admissions, occupancy, and operating policies must be updated to ensure compliance. So to explain this second bullet point a bit more, non-discriminatory means taking measures that do not impact an individual's access or experience in the program. So if, for example, a trans man comes to you and says that he feels uncomfortable showering in the congregate bathroom that has no stalls or curtains. So in this situation, the reaction should not be to isolate that person or segregate them, but rather to change the space itself. The appropriate response in this instance would be to make changes to the showering area for everyone to ensure greater privacy, not to ask him to shower at a different time than everybody else. To take another example, Consider a situation in which there are men's and women's multi-stall bathrooms and a single stall bathroom. If a client is uncomfortable, a good approach is to ask the client why they're uncomfortable and what would make them feel comfortable, and give them options, which could include but should not be limited to using the single stall bathroom or using the bathroom at a different time. So we want to focus on client-centered approaches that don't result in undue segregation. And again, as a reminder, programs should be putting policies and procedures in writing, ideally that anticipate different examples and give guidance to staff on how to proceed. Another context in which this rule comes up is in outreach, engagement, and assessment. In this instance, equal access means accepting the name and gender given by the individual, using the pronoun as indicated by the individual, and if ID is required, to still use the individual's current gender identity as indicated by the individual, not by their government-issued identification. This allows the client to feel more comfortable and continue in the outreach, engagement, and assessment process. If a client is feeling respected, they may give important information that's not included in the assessment that will assist in finding the best services for them. For example, based on the interaction, the staff may be able to recommend services to change the individual's identification if they wish to proceed with that. Equal access in enrollment means providing a confidential area to describe services that the client may want to access to ensure the client's confidentiality. Not asking about the client's sex assigned at birth during the intake process. And if a project segregates services based on gender, accepting the client whose gender expression does not fit. Sorry, I'm just going to pause to make sure everybody can hear. If you're not on mute, if you could please mute yourself. Thank you so much. So the third point here was equal access in enrollment means that if a project segregates services based on gender, accepting the client whose gender expression does not fit the stereotypical gender expression. So to further explain this, on the flip side, undermining equal access in enrollment would mean turning away a potential client based on their gender expression, or treating a client in a way that violates the individual's confidentiality around gender expression, or disrespecting the client's assessment of their safety and trying to encourage them to go to a program that could make them, quote, more comfortable based on the staff person's perceptions. So again, focusing on the client with a focus on respect and accommodation. Equal access in unit or bed assignment means providing confidential space to allow clients to discuss issues related to harassment or other concerns connected to their current gender expression within the project. Modeling appropriate respect and coaching clients that express verbal and nonverbal disrespect, and quickly resolving conflicts severe enough to warrant the expulsion of a harassing client. On the flip side here, undermining equal access in unit or bed assignment would look like ignoring reasonable requests for accommodation in bed assignments based on a client's health and safety concerns. It would mean failing to provide bathrooms and showers arranged to protect privacy, as we discussed a couple of slides ago. Or it might mean moving the compliant client when a conflict arises based on the client's gender identity. So those are things we would not want to do. And instead, we would want to focus on providing a confidential and safe space that is accommodating. And if there are issues related to harassment, addressing those with the harasser. Our final application that we'll consider this morning is equal access in ongoing service provision. And this means things like recognizing the client's right to access all services for which they are eligible, correcting clients' misperceptions that gender expression creates a safety risk, and ensuring that all clients understand that verbal and physical bullying are not tolerated. It would not be equal access to fail to take a transgender client's safety concerns seriously or fail to address them. It would not be equal access to reassign a transgender client based on another client's complaint related solely to gender expression. And it would not be equal access to fail to intervene when a client is harassing someone based on their gender expression. So to ensure truly equal and safe access to housing and services, this means building cultural competency and anti-discrimination into organizational culture. And so to really take us forward with this, I'm going to shortly turn it over to the main event of today. But before I do so, I want to pause here to see if there are any questions. And if so, please feel free to let us know in the chat. Not seeing any questions right now. I just want to let you know we will be around, so feel free to let us know if you do have questions. But for now, I want to thank you for your time and attention. And please feel free to be in touch with us over email if any questions come up. And now I will hand it over to our co-facilitators who will help us to explore and understand what this looks like in housing and homeless services.
Thanks, Monica. And thank you everyone for being here. So my name is Isabella Garcia, pronouns she, her, they, them. And if you're wondering what that means, we'll get to it. I'm here with Priyanka and Quinn, and we'll go ahead and get into our RISE LGBTQ plus training. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and I'll pass it along to Priyanka and Quinn to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Quinn Fan. I work at Life Moves New Haven Inn, the LGBTQ specific shelter in Santa Clara County. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm happy to be here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Priyanka. I work at Home First. I am their training manager. I am very happy to be here today. And I think I will be taking over in just a moment. So if you guys haven't already completed the demographic survey, if you could please do so. And then if you could in your chat, possibly introduce yourself and then choose, or if you want to even rename yourself, Isabella, is this the time when they would do that?
Yeah, so if you want to rename yourself on Zoom and you know how to do that, feel free. There will be those 3 little dots in the corner of your little video box. If you want to click that, and there should be an option to rename, and you can add your pronouns in the rename. So you can do that now if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, there will be an opportunity later on, either today or Thursday, when we talk about pronouns, where you can do that with a little more background info if this is new to you.
Yes, if it is new to you, then definitely we will provide more info as the time goes on, and we will go on. So how's everyone doing today? If you could go ahead and in the chat box, just as kind of an icebreaker, I know that we kind of already started, but if you could in the chat box as an icebreaker, you don't have to type your name in because you guys already did that in the beginning. But if you want to choose between coffee and tea as an icebreaker, what would you choose, or neither? So if you could go ahead. Okay. That was quick, you guys. Awesome. Wow, I see the coffee in like large letters and I really felt that right now. Just while you guys are still doing that, a little bit about housekeeping. If you guys need to go use the restroom, feel free to do so. Cell phones should be off. If we might take a break in a little bit to, give you guys like 5 minutes or so. All right. So while you guys are finishing that up, please, just so you guys know, keep yourselves on mute. That would be very much appreciated. We're going to go ahead with the rest of the curriculum. Our unit 1 is introduction, and the introduction to permanency as well. So we want to focus on the RISE project and its permanency for LGBTQ plus individuals. And we want to look at the goals and the structure for the training. Our role for today. So as the instructors, we want to not only correct misinformation and biased statements, we also want to answer questions that are relevant to the learning objectives. And we want to make sure that the training stays on track and on time. And we want to create a safe space to have productive conversations. And now what I mean by safe space is that we in day-to-day life may make mistakes, right? And so this is a good place for you guys to ask questions. There is no judgment involved, right? We want to make sure that you guys are all, getting everything answered that you may not be able to in when you're even servicing your clients. So this is a good place to start. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us. Our discussion guidelines for today, we want to make sure that you are respecting others' thoughts and feelings, even when they're different from your own. I will definitely speak from my own professional experience. We definitely value confidentiality here. Personal sharing will stay in the group when I leave, right? We want to attempt to manage any distractions, so please keep yourselves on mute again. That is important, especially since we're recording it as well. I forget that sometimes. But if you have any, if you can go to your section and choose the thumbs up sign, if you know where that is, if you agree to our discussion guidelines, that would be awesome. Do you guys know how to do this? Okay, we're doing the smiley faces instead. That's fine too. No worries. So if you go to more, then you can choose your little thumbs up sign. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. All right. So what do we mean? So what we really want to do, so what RISE even stands for, is recognize, intervene, support, and empower. So what that means is that we want to reduce the LGBTQ plus, not just youth, but just individuals in our systems of care. We want to increase permanency options, and we want to decrease bias and discrimination in care through education and coaching. What do we mean by permanency? We mean physical, mental, and emotional safety and stability for individuals. People should have a consistent and safe place to live. They should also have lifelong connections with supportive adults. So we're talking about youth here, but it also, on a broader spectrum covers every single individual. We want to include a place to go for, holiday dinners, someone to call for help when filling out a job application, and someone to call when they have good or bad days. So that's what we mean by permanency, is like that feeling that there's people around you that support you. We want to recognize that we have LGBTQ plus youth in our care, and we want to intervene during instances of harassment and discrimination. We want to support LGBTQ plus youth in our care. We want to empower ourselves and our colleagues to create like an affirming space and environment. And we want to provide the appropriate care for LGBTQ plus youth. And each of these actions will increase the likelihood that, the youth and the individuals will achieve permanency.
Sorry, Priyanka, I'm seeing in the chat that the slides are looking a little blurry.
They do look a little blurry. I do see that. I wonder, Isabella, do you mind sharing that over again?
Yeah. So that might be my connection. I'm sorry about that. I've had some Wi-Fi issues since yesterday. I was hoping they'd be cleared up by today.
Quinn,
So
would
let
you
me
be able to share your
see what I
screen?
can.
I can try.
Thank you.
Let me.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. Hold on. I haven't done this in a while. Let's see.
Is that still blurry?
Yeah, they still are.
How's this?
That's way better, I think.
Okay. Great. So we're on the next slide, I guess.
Yes, we are on what is permanency. So within a broad context, is it improved? Okay, thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Permanency is a holistic state, including but not limited to physical, legal, social, mental, and emotional safety, stability, and well-being for youth. So this really includes lifelong connections with supportive adults, a sense of community, connections with peers, and access to resources that one needs, but not only to survive, but to thrive, right? We want to define permanency within a broad context. It's for youth experiencing homelessness, we maybe focus on pieces of permanency for them, like establishing or reestablishing connections to meaningful adults in their lives. The garden metaphor helps us understand that just like a garden, there may be many parts of a youth's permanency plan that need more attention than others, but as youth grow towards like a holistic sense of permanency. So what do you need to really grow, right? For example, in a garden, you need sunlight, you need water, you need like the appropriate amount of both, right? Good soil. Okay, I think. There we go. Also, thank you, Quinn, for moderating. I appreciate
No worries.
it. Certain permanency disruptions as we look at Santa Clara County. Homelessness in Santa Clara County, LGBTQ comprise of 29% of homeless youth and young adults. Suicide, if you look at those disruptions, you'll see nearly half of transgender respondents in the county seriously considered suicide or hurting themselves in the past 12 months. LGBTQ plus youth have unique developmental processes that families and systems are often unprepared to support. If you look at a national survey, we found that the estimate of the LGBTQ plus population rose to 4.5% in 2017. Other estimates suggest that LGBTQ plus individuals make up about 4% of the adult population in California, and also around 4% in the Santa Clara County specifically. The LGBTQ community is one of the traditionally most underrepresented in our government, underserved by institutions, and underrecognized by society. The socioeconomic outcomes for this community are often far worse than they are for the population at large. This often has to do with miseducation or uneducation in our population as well. But if you look at poverty, you'll see that lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults are more likely to live below 200% of the federal poverty line than heterosexual adults. Homelessness in Santa Clara County, like I said, 29% of the homeless youth and young adults. That means that they're under the age of 25, and 10% of the homeless population are ages 25 and older. Juvenile justice system as well, a disproportionate number of youth are present in our juvenile justice system in Santa Clara County. 13% identify as LGBT. If you look at suicide rates, like I said, lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. And nearly half of transgender respondents in the county's health assessment seriously considered suicide or hurting themselves during the past 12 months. Physical assaults, our county's health assessment found that 10% of LGBTQ plus survey respondents were physically attacked or injured in the past 12 months because of sexual orientation or gender identity. If you look at intimate partner violence or domestic violence, the same assessment found that even though more than 1 out of every 5 LGBTQ plus respondents reported having been hit, slapped, pushed, kicked, or physically hurt by an intimate partner at some point, 3 out of 4 of those who experienced this violence did not report it to law enforcement. If you look at hate crimes, while the overall number of hate crimes committed in the US from 1996 to 2011 dropped nearly 30%, the number of anti-gay hate crimes committed during that time actually rose from 1,206 to 1,256. A national survey of people ages 45 to 75 found that LGBTQ plus respondents are 7% more likely to rely on government when planning for retirement, and 40% of LGBTQ plus people in their 60s and 70s state that their healthcare providers do not know their sexual orientation, right? That's actually a very large problem in and of itself. Mental health and substance use, nearly half of those who responded in the assessment that we looked at when we looked at the community plan for homelessness in Santa Clara County between 2020 and 2025, the assessment felt that they may or might have needed professional help in the last 12 months because of mental health or substance use concerns. So that's nearly 50%.
Okay.
We are going to look at a video. This is the story of George. He's a young man that lives in Los Angeles. We want to pay attention during this video to the pivotal moments and permanency disruptions in George's life and trajectory. And we'll talk about them in our group as we finish up. But you want to look at, so we're going to get that started.
Yeah. There's warnings, content warnings for survival, sex work, substance abuse, child abuse, and involvement in the juvenile justice system, just so we're aware before we get started.
Thank you, Quinn.
And I think you need to check the audio.
Sorry, what was that?
The audio for the video.
Yeah.
I think you might share it again because at least I'm not hearing audio.
Okay. I am not sure why. I'm going to stop the screen share and try again.
I can also take up the screen share if it's easier. You have to share audio from Zoom.
Okay.
Way.
Is that working?
I didn't know what else to do. My biological dad was on drugs, and so he gave me up when I was like 5, and then I stood with my aunt and uncle, and they were super abusive, and I just decided my freshman year in high school that I didn't want to live there anymore, so I ran away.
Family rejection for a teenager, it's a very significant trauma. And then to have to leave home because of that is even more traumatic.
Generally, folks say around 40% of homeless youth are LGBT. So knowing that LGBT youth are more likely to be rejected from their family, more likely to be on the streets and homeless, they're going to be more likely to turn to survival crimes.
I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I came out here. It was a tough decision, but it was the only solution I had to my problem. The first time I did it was on this street. Somebody kept cruising by. That was very scary for a 15-year-old. And it was a really old man. He took me to his house, which I had no idea where it was at. And it was the first time I did it. cried the whole time during that.
The loneliness and the lack of self-esteem that stem from the poor relationships that they may have with their parents just leads to more out-of-home placements for these youth. And because of their being out of their family home, it kind of sets them up for problems later in life.
I got arrested for being a runaway. They put me in the tank for a couple days because I wouldn't tell them my name because I didn't want them to know who I was. So I didn't want them to send me back home. When it was time to see the judge, my aunt had the option to take me back, and she said no. She said, I don't want him, which I was very grateful for because there was no way I wanted to be back with her.
LGBT youth are more often detained by the court if a parent doesn't show up to take them home. And so they might have a misdemeanor like shoplifting charge for which youth would not normally be detained. But if their parent doesn't pick them up at the courthouse, then they will be held.
The mere fact that LGBTQ youth do not have a comfortable place to go home to really changes the whole dynamics of their stay in an out-of-home placement. Because it's not just a temporary placement for them, oftentimes it's just the beginning of their independence or their attempt at independence.
All right, so I know that you guys I don't know if everyone got the video. Was that clear for you? I'm hoping that was clear. Okay, so our first question, if you guys understood the definition of permanency, what would you say in the chat box, if you could type in your answer? What was the first disruption to George's physical permanency? Absolutely. Yes. It, in fact, was parental drug use. His first disruption was not due to rejection based on his LGBTQ plus identity. Thank you, guys. The second question, it's unclear if George was formerly in child welfare, but he lived with extended family members. How did this experience impact his life and trajectory? Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of abuse, family rejection, no options to return to his family after his arrest. Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of rejection. Yep. Thank you, guys. If we had to guess, do we think that George finished high school? Yeah. That would be a no, yeah. Absolutely. Now, going forward, what are the prospects of George finding permanency, would you say? We want to consider his age, C-sex status, family relationships, and LGBTQ plus identity, etc. Yeah, very difficult, right? Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Challenges, yeah, will be low without help. There's a lot of, this is kind of when I think we also have that discussion of equity versus equality, right? He definitely needs more help than someone else would. Yeah. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate all the answers. I'm going to pass it on to Quinn. She's going to take up on Unit 2, which is recognizing the impact of language.
All right, everyone. We're going to talk about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We're going to do a 101 in this unit. So I want to ask y'all, have you heard people in general use the word gay? And I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing the chat. Oh, there we go. So how have we heard it? In what context have we heard people use the word gay? So yeah, when I was in school, right, people were like, wow, that's so gay. Didn't sound that great.
Quinn, would you like me to read some of the responses out?
Yeah, that would be great.
I'm seeing negatively, in a demeaning manner, as a form of bullying, a derogatory term, negatively.
But historically, right, people used to mean gay as in happy, you know, make the Yuletide gay, as seasonal reference. So by definition, gay refers to men who are attracted to other men, often women who are attracted to other women, and it's an umbrella term for the LGBTQ community as well. So given this context, is gay an inherently negative word?
I am seeing no for the most part, and also comment that back when I was a teenager, it meant happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, so the meaning of these words depend on tone and context, how you're using it. There's a difference. It can be pretty easy to tell when someone means like, that's so gay as an insult versus as like something else, you know, as a self-descriptor or otherwise. So there's nothing wrong with the word. It's how we put our own energy into using it. I think we'll be handing out a PDF later, but we're going to move on to this next portion. So this is the gender unicorn. We're going to be looking at these items one at a time. So I want to look first at the little DNA icon on the gender unicorn. And on the right, you'll see that's associated with sex assigned at birth. So when we were born, right, the doctor took a look at us and said one of two things. Can you guess what they are? So most people are assigned male or female at birth. So doctor takes a look between our legs and makes a decision one way or the other. And traditionally, when the doctor assigns us a sex, they also assign us a gender identity. That is the little rainbow on the gender unicorn. So when gender identity is someone's internal personal sense of their own gender. So that just means like whether you feel like a boy, a girl, or something else. However, despite having a gender assigned at birth, gender doesn't really start to develop for most children until they're around 2.5 or 3 years of age. If you notice toddlers, that's the age when you start seeing them self-labeling as a boy and a girl, starting to differentiate between gender roles, segregating toys and activities, all that tends to happen around 2.5 to 3. And the stages of gender identity development are generally complete around the age of 6, although that changes for some people. So that's gender identity, and that's sex assigned at birth. They often correlate. They do not always correlate. So if someone's gender identity differs from their sex assigned at birth, those people are what we call transgender. Trans is a Latin prefix that means across. If someone's gender identity and sex assigned at birth are the same, we call them cisgender, and cis is a prefix that means on the same side. So gender identity, sex assigned at birth do not always correlate. And for gender expression, that's the way in which an individual communicates their gender to others. Their behavior, their hairstyle, clothing, their voice. Can we describe some examples of, I guess, gendered expression? So like clothing, what's a feminine clothing look like? What's a feminine gender expression?
Seeing dresses, skirts, purses, heels. The color pink is assigned to girls usually in Western culture.
Long hair, makeup.
Earrings, makeup.
What's a masculine gender expression?
Pants, ties, facial hair, suits, cufflinks, collared shirts, short hair, not crying.
Yep, those are all true. And you'll notice, like I was pointing out, this is all very Western American centric. Gender expression is directly influenced by time and culture. We know about Scottish kilts. Long hair is a masculine expression in a lot of different cultures. These are gender expression varies. Time, culture, place, and by the individual too. Ideally, we're all able to express our gender in the ways that are most comfortable for us. However, for LGBTQ individuals or just people in general who aren't comfortable with those, it's not always that easy. And so in that case, gender identity, sex assigned at birth, and their gender expression might differ. Someone may identify as a woman, but choose not to express their gender in a feminine way for safety reasons, because that takes time and money for a myriad of reasons. So those three things are different. And that's a brief description of gender. And then we're going to get into sexual orientation. So sexual orientation describes the emotional, romantic, and physical feelings of attraction over a period of time. It's different than sexual behavior. If you'll notice, when we talked about George, he didn't mention at all who he was actually attracted to, what genders he might have been attracted to. He said that he had survival sex with a man, but we don't actually know. So feelings of attraction. I want you all to think about your first crush, if you had one. And so who were they? How old were you? How did you feel when you saw them? And how did your family or friends react?
I'm seeing 5. They were 5 years old when they had their first crush. 3rd grade, and they shared gummy worms. Junior high. 5, 6th grade, junior high.
So that's an example of attraction. It's not necessarily sexual. I'm pretty sure that when we were 5 and 6, we weren't really experiencing any of that quite yet. So attraction consists of emotional and of physical attraction. What we're describing right now is a form of romantic attraction. So the desire to be in a relationship, hold hands, go on dates, maybe kiss a little, cuddle, that kind of thing. And then physical attraction is what we think of generally when we think of sexual orientation. It's who we find sexually attractive. So you can also not feel sexual or romantic attraction to people. As you can see on the little gender unicorn, the little spectrums on the right, you can go from 0 to 100% in terms of physical and emotional attraction, and those don't have to be the same. So someone can not feel any sexual attraction at all. They are therefore asexual. Someone can feel no romantic attraction at all, and they are called aromantic. So a meaning a prefix that is without. So it can go anywhere. Most people tend to be attracted to one gender. People can be attracted to more than one gender, and those are the people we generally call bisexual. So you can have someone who is a biromantic, asexual person, which means that they're attracted to two or more genders romantically, but not attracted to them sexually. Does that make sense so far? Like a scale of 1 to 5.
I don't know if you can see the videos, but there were a lot of head nods.
Okay.
A lot of yeses and 5s as well. So.
Great. So long story short, gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physical and emotional attraction, all different, don't necessarily correlate. Sexual orientation and gender are different. Yeah, long story short. Okay. So what do we mean by spectrums, right? We think of colors, when we're growing up, there's there's red and there's blue. And then we find out that you can mix them and you can get purple. And there's so many other variations out there. So just because we haven't heard of something before doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Happens to everyone. Like what color is chartreuse? I'm still not sure. But it's out there and it's real. And there's all kinds of things. And I want to just point out that we don't necessarily have to have known something existed or to necessarily understand it 100%, but we can still respect it. We can still respect individuals and their identities. So speaking of spectrums, so sex assigned at birth, usually one of two options, but there's also people who are not immediately identifiable as one another when they're born, and they are called intersex people. They used to be referred to with another word, hermaphrodite. We don't use that word anymore. It's considered derogatory. So intersex people, it describes a wide variety of variations for people who I guess society deems not standard as male or female. And you can be intersex in all sorts of different ways, physical, chromosomal, hormonal, reproductive differences. Someone can have like XO chromosomes. They can lack a second sex chromosome altogether and like look like a female. That's what it is. Intersex people often experience a lot of discrimination due to this, their intersex condition. And we'll watch a video shortly on that. But 1 out of every 2,000 live births are intersex. So intersex people are as common as redheads and more common than cystic fibrosis. Okay, so gender identity. Most people are identify in the binary, men or women. That is not the only option out there. You can also be non-binary, genderqueer. Those are the two main words used for people whose gender identity isn't either of those. And that can mean a lot of things. If, like I mentioned earlier, if your sex assigned at birth matches with your gender identity, then those people are cisgender. And so if you identify as anything other than your gender assigned at birth, then you are trans. And non-binary can cover so many different things. So for example, someone assigned male at birth and identifies as a woman is a transgender woman. Someone assigned male at birth and is non-binary is a trans non-binary person. So I'd like to point out also that transgender is an adjective. It's not a noun. We don't say the transgender over there, all right? It's an adjective. So we describe the person if that's necessary, really, and the gender that they're asserting themselves as, because we are going to respect the gender that they are telling us they are.
And I'm seeing a couple of, oh, okay, Isabella said you all will talk about it a bit more.
Yeah, we will. Okay. And there's variations on non-binary, like I mentioned. So like two-spirit is a gender among Native American tribes that is very culturally significant, and they play a large spiritual role in these tribes. It's a third gender. There's people who identify as genderqueer, agender, so lacking a gender altogether, people who identify as gender fluid, their gender changes over time. Yeah, it can go a lot of different ways. So gender expression, like we mentioned earlier, feminine, masculine, androgynous. There's stereotypes about what these are supposed to look like, but I don't think we know very many people, any of us, who fully fall into one of those stereotypes. And I'm not sure if they would be very happy there anyways. And lastly, sexual orientation. We have people who are attracted to their opposite, quote unquote, binary gender, and we call them heterosexuals. We have people who are attracted to their own gender. We call them lesbian or gay. And then bisexual people are people attracted to two or more genders. They don't necessarily have to be men and women. It can be men and non-binary people. But that's generally how that works. Do we have questions on that so far? Any confusion? No, we good? Okay. And there can also be a time when you don't know what your gender identity or your sexual attraction is. It can be difficult when you grow up in a cisgender heterosexual society that prioritizes those identities to understand what your own feelings are on the matter. So people might not always be sure about it. And so wherever they're at on their journey, we are going to respect it. And so we're going to do a quick quiz, I suppose. Okay, if someone was assigned female at birth and identifies as a man, gender expression tends towards the masculine and identifies as heterosexual or straight, what is this person's partner, what's their gender most likely to be? The gender of this person's partner.
So in the chat, there's female, cisgender female, not
So-
determinable.
So I think the question was, what is the sex or sexual orientation of the person that this person is attracted to, right, Quinn?
No, the question is, what's the gender? So if this person, a person assigned female at birth, assigned male, is that, I guess that's kind of relevant, and identifies as heterosexual, what is the gender of this person's partner most likely to be? So it doesn't necessarily, this person would be a transgender man, And if he identifies as heterosexual, his partner is most likely to be a woman. We don't know whether this partner is cis or trans, kind of none of our business. But so it's just to point out that sexual orientation and gender do not correlate, and that we should go off how people assert their own gender. Does that kind of make sense?
I think the broad answers are yes, just so we're
Okay. Okay, we are going to watch a video. And in this video, just a note, there's a person who is referred to by the name Saifa. They are going by the name Sean now.
Raise your hands if you have testes. I'm Pigeon. I'm Alice.
I'm Emily.
I'm Cypher.
And we are Intersexy.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
I identify as a Black intersex man.
Intersex is not new. It's been around since the beginning of human existence. I mean, there's probably even intersex dinosaurs, if you think about it.
Transgender has to deal with your gender identity, whereas intersex has to deal with your biological characteristics.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want. They gave my mom the excuse that the internal testes were cancerous, that I would develop cancer.
They didn't even come up with an excuse, basically, in terms of a health-related reason. They instead just said it was about the appearance.
A lot of doctors are very uncomfortable with the idea that I have testes, and they're still trying to get them removed, but I'm perfectly healthy and there's nothing wrong with them.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
There aren't a lot of options, or medical providers don't explore other options. My mom would put me in dresses and she would be like, "Oh, aren't you so cute and you're so pretty?" And I would be like, "No, this is horrible." I was put on hormonal treatment, which consisted of estrogen and progesterone. I just wanted to belong. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be different. So even though I knew something felt amiss, I conformed. He was very condescending. He was like, "You intersex activists don't know what you're talking about."
It's difficult for intersex people to find each other because from an early age we're told not to talk about our bodies.
I did feel like I was the only one.
My doctors always told me there was nobody else like me, and so it just perpetuates a vicious cycle of shame and stigma that we can't break out of. I would tell another intersex person that you are worthy, you are lovable.
Your body is beautiful, you're beautiful.
Intersex people don't need to be fixed. There's nothing wrong with them.
I know you feel like you might not be able to get through this. I know you might have really dark thoughts, but I want you to know that meeting other intersex people and finding a community or a support group can be one of the most important aspects in your healing process. And we're out there, we're out here, we're here. And I just hope you can find us. Raise your hand.
Okay. I have a few questions. So why do you think doctors and parents decide on intersex children?
I'm seeing not being educated, they're scared into it, the old-fashioned notion that they want people to be normal, ignorance, they're kids, so kids don't have a right, so the adult decides, shame, fear, just wanting to be seen as quote unquote normal in society. Doctors make parents feel bad, societal norms.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stigma around it. And what's the difference between transgender and intersex identities?
So in the chat, we have intersex people are born in between male and female. Intersex is biological, as stated. You are born intersex, no changes on genitalia. And someone saying, I need more to understand. Need to know more.
Yeah, so as mentioned in the video, you know, intersex is a biological condition. Being transgender is an identity that people have. And so also, like the video mentioned, intersex people get surgeries that they never consented to, while trans people have to fight for the surgeries that they need. And last question, again, this person, he goes by Sean, but what's Sean's sexual orientation?
So in the chat, we have, I don't know, girl.
So we don't actually know. Sean didn't talk about his attractions, feelings of romantic and or sexual attraction to anybody. He just talked about his intersex and trans identities. So again, trans and transgender identities, gender identity, and sexual orientation are different. And here's some links to some intersex activism websites that I invite y'all to take a look at. So again, to summarize, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, all different and distinct, don't relate to the sex assigned at birth. And the safest thing we can do is always just to avoid assumptions based on their sexual behavior, on their gender expression. We just don't know, based on external appearances, how people identify their gender or their sexual orientation. And there's lots of assumptions that people make about sexual orientation and sexual behavior. For example, people are like, she can't be gay because she's pregnant, which is assuming, you know, a lot of things. You know, people with uteruses can get pregnant no matter their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Or I don't need to talk to this person about safe sex because she's a lesbian. Well, everyone is susceptible to STDs and STIs regardless of, again, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity. And I don't want to be in a room with a gay person because that person might try something with me. And that is a pretty harmful assumption. It's assuming that LGBTQ people are predatory, which has nothing to do with being a predator. It has nothing to do with being LGBTQ. Okay. So making an impact with language. Hold on, my screen went funky. All right. So using words like lifestyle, phase, preferences, choice, popular, the word homosexual, we don't use that so much anymore. Using the words he, she, or it to refer to a trans person, pretty biased. We don't want to talk about calling identities a lifestyle, a choice. They're doing it because it's popular. I don't think that it's all that popular to be LGBTQ still these days, even in California, even in the Bay Area. It's definitely not something I think that one would necessarily choose just because it's cool and fun. Not so cool and fun still. And so what we do is just to accept people, how they define themselves. That's true of everything, really, but especially with LGBTQ identities, which are stigmatized, it's really important to respect that person. And if someone comes out to you as trans or as, not heterosexual, that's a brave thing to do. And we ought to respect them and use the gender that they assert themselves as. So we should just ask questions. That's always the safest thing to do. It might be safer to ask questions in a private space. I know at New Haven, what we do is during intake, we talk to clients, we ask them their gender, and we ask them what pronouns they want to be referred to as. And if, sometimes clients come in, they don't feel comfortable sharing right away, but a week or two later, they'll come up to staff and they'll be like, I want to use this name now and this set of pronouns, and we switch immediately. It might take some practice. We all make mistakes. We're used to doing things a certain way. It might take a little bit of time to switch over, but we correct ourselves because it's really important. And it's also important to ask, where is it safe to use these names and these pronouns? Someone might be out with with their service providers, but not out at work. So calling their manager and asking for someone with the wrong name and wrong pronouns might be pretty damaging to them. So it's got to, we have to make sure that we are keeping them safe and respecting them at the same time. So how can we create more gender neutral and inclusive language? So, we're Californians, this is hard, but, saying, hey, y'all, instead of, hey, guys, again, difficult. I'm still working on it, but it's something that we really ought to try to do. Instead of making assumptions about people, the genders that people's partners, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Why do we need to do that? We need to say, do you have a partner? And of course, by asking for and using pronouns. And this can be, it doesn't have to be complicated doing that. At New Haven, we just introduce ourselves, name, these are my pronouns, and then we ask, what's your name? What's your pronoun? Not that hard. In other spaces, it might be a little more difficult. So I try to do it in a more private space, if that's necessary. But it's also not fair to only ask people who appear gender nonconforming what their pronouns are, because then you're just singling them out. And we should not do that. If we're going to ask pronouns, we need to ask everyone their pronouns. We are trying to avoid assumptions.
I'm seeing a question asking, isn't guys gender neutral?
Is what?
Isn't the word guys gender neutral?
Not really. Neither is dude. And it's hard to remove from our lexicon, but it's something gotta try harder to do. All right. Okay. So here are some terms that we are avoiding. Transgender, transvestite, transsexual, tranny is a slur, just so y'all know. Transgender is the term that we're using, and it is an adjective. So refer to someone as a trans, whatever gender they identify as. Sexual preference, lifestyle choice, that's not really how that works, as I mentioned. We're going to talk about sexual orientation. Hermaphrodite, not a word we use anymore either. We use intersex. Hermaphrodite is stigmatizing. And sex change operation, We use gender affirming surgery because it's important to note that these are necessary. For the trans people who decide to get them, those are necessary operations, and this is how we support them in their care. So pronouns.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
If you could go back to that last slide.
Yeah.
Thanks, Quinn. So we've gotten some questions about the term, or we've heard transgendered. There's never going to be any time or place to use the word transgendered. It's kind of like a made up word. And usually I think when people use it, there's some confusion, and the word that they're looking for is transitioned. And so when we talk about transition, there are different types of transition. So I know Quinn mentioned some gender affirming surgery, so that could be part of a medical transition. But there are also different social transitions that folks might go through, including, you know, asking folks to refer to them by a different name or pronoun, could be changes in how someone dresses or hairstyles. And so that can all be part of social transition. So there's different types of transition: social transition, medical transition, and varies from individual to individual. But I just wanted to make that distinction. Because there won't ever be a time to use the term transgendered. It's, you know, like Quinn said, making an adjective past tense, and it just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. And then just to go off of, you know, intersex, I know intersex is a fairly new word for a lot of folks. I didn't hear it until I was in college. But really the term hermaphrodite doesn't work for humans. The definition is, you know, an organism that that can reproduce with itself. And as far as I know, humans can't do that. So just no reason to use those two terms.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isabella.
Sorry, I just wanted to address one more thing. I did see the question, isn't guys gender neutral? The problem with guys or using that word is that it's a masculine word, and it reinforces a language that already privileges men in and of itself. And so we want to steer away from that. And yes, it is difficult. I've definitely made this mistake. I'm not saying that, you know, it doesn't happen. I've probably done tons of Zoom calls where that was my first word, like, hey guys, like, how's it going? But then when you really look at the word itself, it does, you know, lend itself to masculinity. So we want to really steer away from assumptive language, and we want to, and yes, it is a mistake, but that's kind of when we, you know, consciously really work on that and then make those changes as needed. Sorry, Quinn, thank you.
No, thanks. All right, pronouns. So pronouns can be also referred to as gender pronouns, and it's how you want people to refer to you. People may have heard preferred gender pronouns as a phrase. However, that implies that pronouns are a preference when it is more of a mandatory kind of thing to respect their gender identity. Their experience of their gender is not a choice, it's not a preference. It is what it is. And so the most common pronoun sets are she, hers, aya, he, him, el. There's also the becoming more common singular they, them, which is grammatically correct. I'd like to point out it's been in use since the 15th century or something like that, and still in use today. And most often, we all already use singular they in our day-to-day conversations. If you're talking about someone whose gender you don't know, you're most likely to use they. So, you know, I tell you that the cashier told me a funny joke today, and you're like, oh, what did they say? So there's no need for the awkward, like, he/she or he or she or anything else in our language. We can just use they. It's okay. It's also a lot easier to say and better on the eyes. And people can also go by all pronouns or no pronouns or by their name only. If people want to be referred to by their name only, then just refer to them by their name only. Or mix it up, use all the pronouns you can think of. There's more than these as well. There's lots of new sets of pronouns that are out there. I don't know if they have them on this slide, maybe, but there's others like Z here or like AM. There's lots out there, and it can take a little bit of time to learn how to conjugate those, but they're out there. And so it's really important that even if we don't know how to use these, or we haven't heard of them before, it's really important to try, because when we fail to do that, we're going to be misgendering them. So referring to them using the incorrect pronouns and the name that they don't use. This is really harmful to someone. It can, it's often done intentionally to cause emotional and psychological harm. It can also be done, of course, unintentionally because of the assumptions that we make about people. It is just a form of damage. Would you ask for help from someone if they were constantly using the wrong name for you and the wrong pronouns? I don't think we would. It damages your relationship with your client when you misgender them. So what happens when we misgender people? Because we all do it unintentionally, because we forget, because we don't know. So what do? We apologize, we correct ourselves and move on, and then we practice. So there's like when you catch yourself, which we should try to do, or if someone corrects you about someone's pronouns, just like, oh, sorry, he said this. Don't linger on it, especially if you're talking to that person. Don't be like, oh my God, I am so sorry, I just forgot, I am so new, because now you're putting like some emotional labor on that person to make you feel better about your mistake. And they don't need that from you. They just need you to do, to refer to them correctly. And so then we practice. I've talked to my toaster about someone's pronouns because I was having trouble with this new set of pronouns. And I was like, okay, Z is going to go to their appointment with me. I just practiced. It's really important to do this, to ask these questions and to correct others when they make mistakes, and just respect people's identities.
I'm just going to jump in really quick as well, Quinn. Another thing that I've started doing ever since, we did this training, and, I'm trying to get into the practice of it. So what I do is I introduce myself with my pronouns, and it really does create almost like a role model experience for everyone else that follows. So then they can either ask me questions about why I'm sharing my pronouns, or B, they can share theirs as well. So it's more just like, hey, my name is Priyanka. I use she, her pronouns. And, whether they choose to share their pronouns or not is on them, but it really does create that space of safety. Like, okay, this person, is able to share their pronouns, so I should be able to do so as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that helps, but.
No, definitely it does. Sharing your pronouns doesn't have to be a thing for only trans people, because again, we're singling us out now. It's uncomfortable. If we all make it a practice to introduce ourselves with the pronouns, to put in our email signatures or our Zoom nicknames, then we're normalizing the practice for everyone, and people will know that if they choose to disclose their trans identity to you, that you're more likely to be safe to speak to about it. So this is all part of how we create a safe and inclusive atmosphere for people.
Super thankful, especially because I think it was quite a few months ago that my organization actually took that into effect. And they, asked every single person that works there to, redo their email signatures with their pronouns. So it's been a step that they've taken. So very appreciative of that as well.
Definitely. Okay. This is a practice. Do we want to do this now, or do we want to do it on Thursday with the other practice sections?
Yeah, I think maybe we can hold on it and see if we can get to it on Thursday.
Okay.
But folks are more than welcome to practice with people that you live with your mirror, with your toaster, with your fur baby, you know, if you want to practice pronouns, that's great.
Yeah. So, final takeaways. Our gender expression is not an indicator of our sexual orientation. Everyone has a gender identity, whether that means you're cis or trans. We all have one. Sexual orientation is different than sexual behavior, and our language carries meaning and it has an impact. It is one of the most important ways to develop a good relationship with your clients, to build rapport, just to respect them and to let people know that this is a safe space for LGBTQ individuals. And we don't know if someone is LGBTQ unless they tell us. So the safest thing to do, again, is to make no assumptions and to make this space safe for everybody. All right. Okay. I think we're on you now, Isabella.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to, I know we've covered a lot, so I just want to acknowledge that this is a lot of information. I know some folks are wondering or asking in the chat, you know, how am I supposed to remember all of this? This is a lot. We hear you, it is. And especially if this is new, that's totally understandable. We'll go through these like best practice guidelines, these takeaways. And really, these main concepts are what we want folks to take with them. If you don't memorize all the terms and definitions, you know, that's a learning process. You'll get there. And what's most important here is the concepts, right? So assumptions are hard. We all have assumptions. The best practice here is to, you know, when you make an assumption or when you notice it, start to notice when you're making these assumptions, when you see someone, when you automatically refer to someone by a certain set of pronouns, notice when you're doing that and maybe catch yourself, right? So it's a kind of process where you'll learn to catch yourself as you're doing it and kind of question and challenge, why am I doing that? Why did I assume that? Why did I think that, right? And then maybe just asking. So if we just ask somebody for their pronouns, ask someone what name to refer to them by, that's like that's the respect, right? That's the basic. So if you come away with anything from today, it's to challenge your assumptions, to ask for name and pronouns, to state your name and pronouns, and to have your pronouns in things like your email signature, like your Zoom name, wherever you can, and introduce yourself. And basically just make that open. And then I think back to this last best practice guideline of not knowing if someone is LGBTQ unless they tell you is really important, because everything that we're going through today and that we'll go through on Thursday, you know, we don't want folks to see this through the lens of, oh, my 2 or 3 LGBTQ plus clients that I know are out is who this applies to, right? This applies to everyone. And so we've shifted over from an LGBTQ 101 to a SOGIE 101, and SOGIE being that sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, because we all have that. And so, yeah, and I think I could go on forever about like curb cutting effects and why it's so important to just kind of use this as a lens in our practice. But we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just continue through. But I just wanted to kind of check in and make sure that folks are okay and that we know this is a lot. And all of us will, you know, we'll share our emails and our contact info, and we'll be available for any kind of follow-up. There's a ton of other trainings if you want to continue your training and education on this, which is great. Highly recommend. And so we're more than happy to share that. So just wanted to kind of touch base before we move on.
And again, we're very welcoming of questions. I really do want to encourage you guys to ask questions because we're all learning, and that's okay. And the more that you ask questions, the more that you can unlearn certain things, relearn, you know, different things. But also, we also want to like touch on the subject that we're not here to change your opinions on anything. We're just more so educating on different opinions. So.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah. I think, you know, like it doesn't matter necessarily what our personal beliefs are about, I guess, people's identities, but it's about how we treat our clients. That's what's important here, is how we care for and how we treat our clients. It doesn't matter what our personal beliefs are. It's just about, best practices.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks guys. Thanks everyone.
We want to create the best environments for all of our clients. So that's what we're here for.
Yes.
All right, we can go ahead and move into Unit 3. And then we do have some nice practice activities, things like that, that we'll go into more on Thursday. So this will continue. Okay, so for Unit 3, we'll talk about intervening to reduce barriers to permanency. And so spending time in systems of care is difficult. It's not always easy to connect, to have permanency, whether that's legal permanency, physical permanency, emotional permanency. So this unit is going to focus on those barriers that LGBTQ+ folks face. And if we're unaware of these barriers, it can impact the clients that we're working with, and reduce their chances of finding and building healthy, permanent connections. So we want to make sure we're aware of these barriers and these biases in order to kind of see where they show up and provide the best care. So we'll talk about these 3 types of bias. So folks may have heard of homophobia, transphobia, maybe heterosexism, but I think the homophobia and transphobia are more common. And so we want to shift away from that language, because they're not fears, right? They're biases that negatively affect folks. And interestingly enough, I came across this this thing in terms of like racism and like how that's kind of progressed through the years. And that actually started with like a term around phobia. So anyway, I don't want to go too much into that, but it's really interesting how we use language and how language is used to like protect certain groups of people, and not others, right? So when we have things like homophobia, transphobia, it's protecting the perpetrators of this bias, right? And what we want to do is protect the folks that are facing this bias. So let me go ahead and get into these definitions here. All right, so for anti-gay bias, we have this defined as hatred, discrimination, or aversion to lesbian, gay, and bisexual or LGB people, people perceived to be LGB, or those associated with people that are LGB. And an example of anti-gay bias could be like a foster family refusing to take in an LGBT child into their home. Anti-transgender bias is the hatred, discrimination, or aversion to transgender or gender variant people, people perceived to be such, or those associated with persons who are transgender or gender variant. And an example here could be like somebody being denied the right to wear certain hairstyles or clothing that reflects their gender identity or just their expression. And it could look like transgender, gender variant youth being excluded from activities because of a quote unquote bathroom issue. So things like that would be kind of classified within these bias categories. And I do want to kind of highlight here that for anti-gay bias, it's for folks that identify and are LGB, as well as those that are perceived to be and those associated with. And similarly with anti-transgender bias. And so perception really can be harmful in this way, right? If someone's perceived to be such, as well as those that support these folks. So we want to make sure that we're creating safe spaces for all of them, for all of us. And then heterosexism is a system of beliefs and biases that are informed by the idea that heterosexuality is the right way to be and the only way to be. So anything that is not heterosexual is wrong. And similar to other isms, so this can look like asking somebody if they have a boyfriend or a husband, or a wife or a girlfriend, right? Instead of a partner or things like that. And And so along with this heterosexism, we want to talk about heterosexual privilege. And so heterosexual privilege is the privileges that heterosexual people have because of the societal assumption that all people are heterosexual and heterosexuality is the only legitimate way to live one's life. Being heterosexual carries with it these privileges that may be explicit or implicit that I think folks don't always think about or really see. And even with more knowledge and awareness here, there may be a shift, but this is still seen as the kind of default, right? So examples of heterosexual privilege are more placement options for heterosexual youth, not having to worry about family rejection based on SOGIE when it's time to go home, the ability to work with service providers that won't disparage their SOGIE, not having the stress of coming out or hiding someone's sexual orientation or gender identity, not having to worry about losing placement when coming out, not having to hear derogatory comments about their SOGIE on a daily basis, and not having to worry about being ostracized, bullied, or harassed because of their SOGIE or perceived SOGIE. And then access to supports and resources that are competent to meet their needs, right? So these are things that folks don't even think about, but that they have automatically, right? Whereas folks that aren't heterosexual or aren't cisgender don't have those types of privileges. And then we have a video coming up, and this is a story about Antoine, a teenager in New York's foster care system. So as we watch this, please pay attention to how these different biases impact Antoine's road to permanency. So anti-gay bias, anti-transgender bias, and heterosexism.
Group homes for LGBTQ youth are one way that the foster care system has tried to provide a safe community. Antoine currently lives in one such home in Brooklyn. His journey is familiar to many kids in the system.
I was just coming into like dating the boys, like just getting into it. So I used to keep a journal, and in that journal I used to keep everything, like however I felt, like my experiences.
Antoine's mother found his journal and discovered that he was gay.
She tells me she reads my journal, and so I felt violated after that. When I came home, it was a big thing. We was arguing, and then it became physical.
Because of the emotional and physical abuse, Antoine ended up being removed from his home.
At first, I wanted to go into a foster home, so that's what they were trying to look for me. I was kind of worried, I was scared, but I felt I wanted the loving of a family. I just felt like I wouldn't be able to find that in a group home.
Despite Antoine's desire to live with a foster family, he was placed in a group home for LGBTQ youth.
You're in a house with strange people that you don't know. You don't know who to trust. People that come here, they look for the love that they're missing at home. They look for the family that they don't have anymore. So this is like the legendary stove. Like here in the legendary stove, this is where I gotta do all my concoctions.
The group home houses 6 LGBTQ youth. They live as a community and learn life skills they will need to live on their own.
So we sit here like a family. We say grace. Being here in a welcoming community is very comforting. You're able to be who you are as a person. You don't have to hide it. My little creation, something. Like a lot of people don't accept the GLBT community. And being here, I just feel safe, and it's like a haven.
While at the group home, Antoine was able to graduate from high school, begin college, and even start to work on rebuilding a relationship with his biological family.
Our relationship has rekindled, I guess. I mean, you only got one family at the end of the day. We get along, we speak. I feel like I had to learn that I have to love people from a distance.
Although group homes are a common option, providers are starting to shift towards finding family settings for LGBTQ youth.
In the regular child welfare system, we keep talking about kids staying with their family and kids staying in family-like settings, but gay kids were put in group homes because things were so tough within family context. But in reality, I realized that was a mistake. I think we needed to really think more about how to preserve family connections with kids who are LGBTQ. Families, in many cases, really do want to love their child and just need to learn how to change some of their own mindsets about that.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get into that debrief. So feel free to type responses in the chat. So for our first question, what kind of bias did Antoine experience? Thanks, Gabrielle. I see anti-gay bias, anti-gay. Okay. So I see a couple anti-gay. Thanks, everyone. So what is an example of anti-gay bias that Antoine experienced? Rejection, abuse. Put in a group home, being removed from his home, neglect, mom's reaction. Yeah. So do we think that Antoine experienced anti-transgender bias? Why or why not? And I saw something in the chat here, so I think somebody was thinking about this already. Do we think that Antoine experienced anti-transgender bias? Why or why not? I see yes. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, Antoine didn't mention gender. That's a good point. So for folks that said yes, why do we think Antoine could have experienced anti-transgender bias? I see his clothing, expression, assumptions. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. So Antoine definitely could have experienced anti-gay bias, anti-transgender bias based on perception, based on, mother reading her child's journal and responding and reacting in that way. Yeah, and I did want to point out something here. Antoine mentions, trying to reconnect or speak to biological family. And Antoine mentions loving from afar or at a distance, right? So we get a kind of peek into, and I'm kind of answering this last one, Antoine's emotional permanency. So sorry about that. But any other insight into how did bias impact Antoine's emotional permanency? Okay, no, I can't answer that one, sorry. It just sticks out to me and it sticks, right? Like nobody should have to feel that. But we know that a lot of folks do. A lot of folks that have these types of experiences do feel like they have to love from afar, even their closest family members. So, okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to add too that Antoine wanted to be placed in a foster family with one that could love him as well, and didn't manage to get that either because of his LGBTQ identity. So he couldn't get the emotional support he needed from his biological family or from his foster family.
Thanks, Quinn. Yeah, definitely. That's a really important point. I'm seeing not feeling fully loved by his family, but also wanting that connection. Yeah, you see Antoine says, I wanted the loving home of a family, and then being placed in foster care. So, in a group home, which we see happening to LGBTQ young folks, because the systems aren't, kind of set up to support them in that way. Anyway, yeah, thanks for that.
Speaking of systems.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and get into recognizing bias in care. And I know we don't have a ton of time left. So instead of doing this in groups, we'll go ahead and just do this in the chat. So we'll start with I'll give an overview, right? So here we have these three kinds of questions. So first is, how might bias cause entry into systems of care? Our second is then, how might somebody encounter bias while within systems of care? And then how might bias challenge permanency option? So we're kind of looking across this timeline, right, of entry into systems of care, experiences within systems of care, and then permanency options. So for this first question, I want folks to kind of think about and type in the chat responses to how might bias cause entry into systems of care? And we've seen some examples in videos today. Thanks, Patrick. I see cause of entry, rejection from biological family. Yeah, people being rejected from blood family, family rejection. Being removed from family due to abuse, society rejection, lack of support. Bias usually by person in power or caregiver, separation. Yeah. Bias on the part of a social worker or judge. Definitely. Yeah, so we know that practitioners have a direct influence or power to recognize and intervene to reduce these kinds of actions or behaviors that could compromise the safety and well-being of folks in care. Potential foster parent bias, family abandonment. Yeah, so family rejection and abuse. You know, I think we saw with the first video, youth who commit minor crimes are released to custody or care of a guardian or parent. Somebody who's LGBTQ+, who's been rejected by caregivers or adults in their lives may have to show up to court and will linger in the system longer than non-LGBTQ+ youth. We know that LGBTQ+ folks can be targeted by biased officers and given harsher punishments. Yeah. Pressure to place the child youth quickly and being placed too quickly with assessing the foster placement, meaning other foster kids adult. Yeah, we've seen some placements that turn out to be even more harmful for folks that are LGBTQ. So moving on, how might folks encounter bias while within systems of care? Without assessing the foster placement, yeah. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so programs and placements that are not trained or equipped to meet specific needs, being placed in a group home instead of a foster family. Thanks, Lucia. Discrimination and bullying in group home and facility settings, lack of access to LGBTQ+ specific resources, lack of re-entry options as they prepare for release into the community. Definitely, Alexander, wrong assumptions of what they need, or just assumptions, right, of what they need, instead of actually speaking to the person, to the individual for, what it is that they need. Disrespectful interactions, assessment that don't include LGBTQ, yeah. Not being treated the same, definitely. Thanks, everyone. These are some thoughtful responses. So on to our third and last question for this activity. How might bias challenge permanency options? So we've talked about emotional permanency, legal permanency, many types of permanency. I'm seeing withholding of info in the chat. Yeah, so family of origins may not overcome bias, which makes family reunification difficult or impossible. There may not be enough information or investigation before placement. Thanks, Michelle. Having to redefine how to interact with family. Thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, that kind of brings us back to the loving from afar comment. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Not enough options, yeah. All right, so these are good things to think about because, you know, we all play a part in reducing the harm that can be done when it comes to bias affecting entry into systems of care, affecting folks' experiences in system of care, and permanency options. All right. Thanks, Quinn. So a great thing to do, you know, we've covered a lot of content. There's a lot to think about here. So a self-awareness check is always super great for all of us to be doing, no matter where we are in our process or journey of learning and growing when it comes to this information and these concepts. So, and you will get a packet, but we do have some questions here on the slide that can help for self-awareness checks. So self-awareness is imperative when working with LGBTQ+ clients, whether we're aware of our biases or not. They definitely affect our interactions with clients. There may be somebody who isn't out and we make a comment not knowing, and, you know, and this person is affected by that. It can damage rapport. So whether we're aware of the biases or not, these can affect our clients. And we have to understand how we feel about serving LGBTQ+ people so that we can do our best to ensure that these biases don't interfere with our ability to provide and to provide the best care and to serve all people equitably. So here are some questions that can help, and feel free to, you know, you can take note of these yourself. You also have the slides and this information, so you can always refer back to this on, you know, a monthly basis and just periodically if you want to kind of check in with yourself. So 1, how can your bias affect the youth you work with? And so you can think of your situation specifically. So in your work specifically, how might that look? And then 2, on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you discussing somebody's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression? And, you know, this can be when it comes to data collection, when it comes to assessing needs and resources or supporting somebody. But how comfortable are you discussing somebody's sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression? You know, can you create that open space? Can you provide an environment where somebody would feel comfortable to disclose? And then on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you advocating for a transgender youth that is being harassed in the bathroom, or just a transgender person being harassed in the bathroom? And I will say on this point, legally in the state of California, any and all single stall restrooms must be labeled and designated all gender by sign. And that's including our county, right? All California. So luckily we do have a resource with the Office of LGBTQ Affairs for our county that any small business within Santa Clara County can, you know, fill out a quick online request form on their website and receive up to 2 signs of each, which is, you know, that blue circle, white triangle, and then the text that goes on the wall. For free. So any small business, somewhere you go get boba, somewhere you go get sandwiches, right? If you notice they have a single stall restroom and they haven't updated their signs, you can let them know. And it's of help to them. Anyway, so we want to check in with our comfortability around these topics and issues, and then what areas we might need support in. And then, as I mentioned, we're all available to support, and we'll share our emails at the end. And then working through it. So we want to make sure folks are finding encouraging, safe, supportive environments to acknowledge and explore underlying beliefs and attitudes, to practice supportive behaviors. If you have a coworker or colleague, you can kind of practice, if you're working on a client's pronouns and, you know, you want to make sure you're getting them right, you can practice with a colleague or a coworker. Seek out more education. There's tons of resources, tons of trainings, and have future discussions. Keep the conversation going, keep growing. And then really quickly, our takeaways for this unit are everyone has bias. We're working on acknowledging and challenging the bias that we have when they show up. And biases are learned and often based on stereotypes or myths. Anti-gay bias and anti-transgender bias can affect clients within systems of care and the folks that we work with. And best practice is the self-awareness checks. You have that information, and I want to make sure that Nicole has some time to wrap us up. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Quinn, Priyanka, and Isabella, for sharing your time and insight with us. And thank you all for attending today and being so engaged in the chat. Really appreciate that. I want to preview, please, if you are able to attend, please attend day 2. That's on Thursday. So day 2 is really going to be focused on operationalizing and putting these lessons into practice. So a lot of interactive activities. We're also going to have the Speakers Bureau as a panel, so you really don't want to miss that. I'm going to drop a survey in the chat. This is a different survey than the one that was originally circulated at the top of our training. So if you could take a couple minutes to fill that out, we greatly appreciate it. We read through every single response, and it really helps us tailor our trainings in the future to better serve you all. But thank you so much for attending today. And like always, we will be sending out the recording, the slides, and any other materials following this training. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. And Alicia put in the chat a link for more info on the all gender restrooms.